You know, usually when we talk about making a medical diagnosis, there is this fundamental expectation of precision. It
Mm.
feels almost like engineering, right? You fall off a bike, you break your arm, they put you in the x-ray machine, and like a few minutes later, you are staring at a glowing screen.
Yeah, with that jagged white line across the bone.
Exactly. The doctor points a pen at the screen and just says, there is the problem.
Yeah.
Broken or not broken, it is entirely binary, it's clean.
It's incredibly comforting, really.
Right, because we love that kind of visible, undeniable categorization. It tells us exactly what to do next, put a cast on it, 6 weeks, done.
Well, and it provides the illusion of total control.
Mhm.
The physical sciences give us these mechanistic models where action A always produces result B.
Yeah.
But the moment you take that mechanistic that whole X-ray mindset and try to
Yeah.
apply it to the messy, layered, deeply unpredictable world of human communities,
Oh, the machine just completely breaks down.
it absolutely shatters.
Because the diagnostic landscape goes from being this clear pane of glass to just absolute mud. You can't just point a scanner at a neighborhood or a nonprofit or a church congregation and say, ah, yes, a simple fracture of communal morale in the third quadrant. Let's apply a generic 6-week program.
I mean, you can try, but
It won't work. But that dynamic, the danger of the generic prescription and how to actually read the complex reality of a community, that is exactly what we are unpacking today.
yeah, it's such a vital topic.
So, welcome to today's deep dive, where we are exploring a really fascinating text. It's titled 013 Designing Ministry Responses That Fit the Map.pdf. And honestly, it serves as this incredible survival guide for organizations.
Specifically churches and ministries, yeah.
Right. It's all about figuring out how to stop relying on those easy copy-paste programs. And I want to say right up front to you, the listener, whether you are leading a massive volunteer organization or trying to build a business that actually serves its neighborhood, or honestly, if you just want to be a better neighbor on your own street, this deep dive is a masterclass. It's a masterclass in moving from just having well-meaning assumptions to tailored, profoundly effective action. Okay, let's unpack this. The central premise of the text kicks off with this brilliant, almost haunting metaphor.
Yeah, it really grabbed you.
It argues that a map is only useful when it changes where you go next.
Right, because a map that informs nothing is, well, it's just decoration.
Just a poster on the wall.
Exactly. I mean, think about the modern obsession with data collection, right? An organization will spend tens of thousands of dollars on these massive demographic studies.
Oh, easily.
They'll host community listening sessions. They aggregate data on local poverty lines, median incomes, high school dropout rates, and they create this beautiful, intricate diagnostic map.
And then what do?
They file it away in a drawer, and they go right back to running the exact same programs they ran in, like 1995.
It's wild.
They treat the data as a trophy of their own intelligence rather than an actual mandate to change their behavior.
Which brings us right into the core danger the text outlines, which is generic ministry. The author argues that ministries constantly default to familiar programs, resulting in what they call effort without fit.
Effort without fit, yeah.
I want to go back to that medical metaphor for a second. Generic ministry is like a doctor who prescribes a massive dose of broad-spectrum antibiotics to every single patient who walks into the clinic.
Regardless of the symptoms.
Exactly. The doctor might be incredibly sincere, right? They might desperately want the patient to heal, but handing out broad-spectrum antibiotics for a viral infection, it doesn't just fail to cure the virus. It actively destroys the patient's healthy gut bacteria.
It creates collateral damage.
Yes.
When you parachute a massive generic program into a delicate community ecosystem, you often disrupt the fragile existing microstructures of support that were, already there.
You're doing more harm than good.
Exactly. You end up answering questions nobody in that specific zip code is even asking. And what's fascinating here is how the text contrasts this generic approach with a concept called holy specificity.
Holy specificity. I love that phrase.
It's brilliant. It roots this in the theology of the incarnation. So the argument is that God didn't save humanity in the abstract.
Right. He didn't just stay in the clouds and broadcast a generic manifesto of goodwill.
No. He entered specific geography. He walked into a specific culture, speaking a specific dialect, living under the very specific political pressures of Roman occupation.
There is a line from the text that it's staggering. It says, God does not merely save people in the abstract. He enters the map.
It demands an entirely different posture from leadership, doesn't it?
Completely.
If you look at the historical examples the text pulls, the methodology is really striking. Like, take the ancient story of Nehemiah.
Oh, yeah, this is a great example.
So he gets word that the walls of Jerusalem are destroyed, the gates are burned, and the people are in disgrace. He travels hundreds of miles to get there. But when he arrives, he doesn't immediately call a town hall meeting.
He doesn't distribute a 5-point strategic plan for urban renewal.
Right. The text points out that he waited 3 days and then he went out at night in total silence to personally inspect the ruined gates.
Which makes you wonder, right, why at night? Why in
Let's
silence?
avoid the political noise, to completely bypass the PR spin of the local leaders who, let's be honest, probably wanted to tell him why the damage wasn't their fault.
Oh, for sure.
He needed an unvarnished, direct encounter with the physical reality of the map. He needed to feel the ash on his own hands before he opened his mouth to offer any kind of solution.
Wow.
Or look at the text's analysis of how Jesus communicated. He never used a script. When he spoke to Nicodemus, who was this highly educated, elite religious scholar, he engaged him in complex, high-level theological discourse about spiritual rebirth.
Right. He met him on his level.
Exactly. But when he met the Samaritan woman at the well, a woman carrying immense social shame, navigating this complex web of relational trauma, he completely shifted his paradigm.
He didn't give her the academic lecture.
No, he offered her living water. The intervention was flawlessly mapped to the specific pathology of the person standing right in front of him.
Okay, the beauty of that specificity is undeniable. It sounds incredibly poetic. But if you put on the hat of an organizational leader or a pastor trying to manage a rapidly growing congregation on a really tight budget, I have to push back here a little bit.
Sure, go for it.
Efficiency matters. If you have 5,000 people in your community, you cannot custom tailor a profound individual theological intervention for every single person.
You burn out.
You would burn out your staff in a week and you'd go completely bankrupt. The modern industrial model works for a reason, right? If you create one excellent scalable program, you can reach the masses. Doesn't the sheer scale of human need kind of demand a generic, scalable approach?
That is the ultimate founder's dilemma right there. You are applying the logic of the Industrial Revolution, basically the logic of the assembly line, to human souls.
Oh.
And yes, an assembly line is incredibly efficient at producing identical cars. But human beings are not identical cars. The author explicitly warns that prioritizing institutional efficiency over incarnational specificity basically manages categories while ignoring actual persons.
Managing categories while ignoring persons.
Exactly. Think about your pushback regarding scale. If you build a massively efficient, highly scalable marriage enrichment seminar and you roll it out to 5,000 people, that looks like a huge win on a spreadsheet.
The board of directors will love it.
They'd be thrilled.
Yeah.
But what if the actual silent crisis in your specific neighborhood isn't marriage health, but crushing economic exhaustion and single-parent isolation?
Then my incredibly efficient program is completely irrelevant to the actual pain on the ground.
Irrelevant and potentially alienating. Because that exhausted single mother sees your massive billboard for the marriage seminar, and the message she internalizes is, this institution does not see my map. I am invisible here.
Wow. Yeah, that hurts to hear.
Efficiency without specificity is a trap. It treats people as interchangeable data points. The text really forces leaders to grapple with the fact that true shepherding cannot be fully industrialized. A shepherd knows the specific terrain. They know which sheep is lagging, which one is injured. You just cannot automate empathy.
Which means you actually have to do the grueling work of studying the map of your community.
Yes.
But that leads to a pretty terrifying realization. Once you gather that specific data, once you see the deep isolation, the hidden poverty, the specific relational fractures in your neighborhood, you can't unsee it.
No, you can't.
You can no longer plead ignorance. The data demands a response.
It totally removes your plausible deniability.
Exactly. Which forces a transition from merely possessing insight to actually launching an intervention. And the text is brutal on this point. It insists that understanding is not the same as obedience.
Yeah, the author uses a phrase here that should honestly haunt any leadership team. They call it untranslated understanding.
Untranslated understanding. It makes me think of an architectural firm.
Okay, how so?
Imagine an organization that hires the best surveyors, soil experts, and architects in the world. They draft this flawless, incredibly detailed blueprint for a housing complex to solve the local homelessness crisis. The blueprints are absolutely perfect,
Right.
but they never buy a single piece of lumber. They never pour an ounce of concrete. They just frame the blueprint, hang it in their corporate lobby, and point to it saying, look how deeply we understand the housing crisis.
Meanwhile, the people outside the lobby are still sleeping in the rain.
Exactly. That is untranslated understanding.
And the text frames this not just as a strategic failure, but as a profound moral failure.
So what does this all mean for leadership then?
Well, the author argues that intervention is fundamentally a moral word. It is not corporate jargon. To intervene means to step into a trajectory of suffering in a way that actually alters its course.
Altering the course.
Right. If your map reveals a crisis and you restrict your response to holding more committee meetings about the crisis, you are succumbing to the paralysis of analysis. You're basically using research as a shield against the costly vulnerability of actually taking action.
The text provides a really fascinating comparative study of two theoretical churches to illustrate this. Let's dig into that.
Oh, this is one of my favorite parts.
So both churches exist in the same demographic area. Both churches do their homework and correctly diagnose the exact same problem on their map. The problem is severe youth isolation, skyrocketing anxiety, and digital addiction among local teenagers.
A very real scenario for a lot of communities today.
Very real. So they both possess the insight, but their interventions are entirely different. Let's look at Church A. Church A decides the solution to adolescent isolation is to throw a massive, high-production youth rally.
Classic approach.
Right. They rent a huge stage, bring in a charismatic speaker, hire a professional band, pump the room full of lasers and fog, and it works numerically. 500 kids show up, the energy's electric, the leadership team goes home feeling incredibly successful.
But the text refuses to call that an intervention.
No.
No, it classifies that as an occasion.
Why? What's the difference?
Let's examine the neurology and the sociology of what Church A just did. They identified chronic isolation and anxiety conditions that are deeply rooted in the nervous system and the social fabric of these teenagers' daily lives.
Right.
And they treated it with a massive one-night dopamine spike. A loud concert provides a temporary rush of collective effervescence. But what happens on Monday morning?
Crash.
Exactly. That teenager wakes up in the exact same fractured family system, scrolling the exact same toxic social media feeds, completely alone. The dopamine crashes. In fact, the contrast between the high of the rally and the stark reality of their bedroom might actually deepen their sense of isolation.
Oh.
Church A treated the symptom, which they assumed was boredom, instead of the root cause.
They threw a party on top of a foundational crack.
That's exactly it. Now look at Church B. They possess the same data, but they refuse the quick fix. They realize these teenagers don't need more entertainment. They need safe, regulated nervous systems.
They need anchored adults.
Yes. So Church B decides to build an after-school mentoring program. They create small, quiet spaces where 3 kids sit with 1 trained adult every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon for a year. They help with homework. They provide a space where a teenager can talk without being judged or rushed.
It's not flashy, though. I mean, nobody is taking a picture of 3 kids doing algebra to put on an Instagram highlight reel.
No, absolutely not. It is slow, tedious, and infinitely more complex to manage than a one-night concert. But it is an actual intervention.
Because it changes the trajectory.
Yes, it physically alters the social architecture of those teenagers' lives. It provides the slow, steady relational rewiring that actually builds resilience against anxiety. Church B moved from insight to an intervention that was proportionate and fitting to the actual pain on the map.
But wait, if I'm Church B and I decide to build that mentoring program, I have a massive hurdle to clear first.
Which is?
Well, I can build the safest, most beautiful room in the world, but if those teenagers or their parents really don't trust me, the room stays empty. The map might tell me what they need, but it doesn't automatically grant me the relational capital to provide it.
Right.
I haven't earned the right to intervene.
Which is the hardest pill for proactive leaders to swallow.
Yeah.
Because before you can build the intervention, you have to establish presence.
The radical power of presence and listening.
Yes.
The text argues that presence precedes persuasion. It states that in a world obsessed with speed, optimization, and transactional metrics, to linger is radical. Listening is not a prelude to the real ministry. Listening is the ministry.
It is the foundation of all legitimate authority in a community.
Okay, I am going to be entirely honest here. This is where my own internal wiring fights the text aggressively.
Really? Tell me about that.
I am a fixer. Most leaders are fixers. If my house is on fire, I don't want a firefighter to come and sit on the lawn and linger in my pain.
Right.
I want them to turn on the hose. If I look at a community and see a broken system, staying near without fixing feels incredibly passive. It feels dangerously close to negligence. It feels like I'm wasting time validating pain when I could be curing it.
Yeah.
And that is the natural reflex of the highly competent leader. But a human community is not a burning house, and it is not a broken bone.
What is it then?
A marginalized community, or a neighborhood carrying deep historical trauma, operates much more like an immune system.
An immune system.
Yeah. If you rush in from the outside with your brilliant solutions, the community's immune system will identify you as a foreign body and reject you.
Because they have seen you before. The text points out that under-resourced communities are often overstudied and underloved. University researchers, politicians, well-meaning charities, they have parachuted in for decades.
Taking notes, taking pictures.
Exactly. They extract data, they take photos for their annual reports, they run a shiny program for 6 months, and the moment the grant money runs out or the novelty wears off, they vanish.
They leave behind a trail of broken promises.
Exactly. So when you show up with your hose to put out their fire, their immediate logical assumption is that you are just the next tourist. Your desire to fix them feels like an objectification of their pain.
Ouch.
This is why the author lovingly dismantles the idea that lingering is passive. Presence is a highly active, fiercely intentional, non-anxious choice to heal suspicion. You are actively dismantling their expectation of abandonment by simply refusing to leave.
That reframes the entire concept of listening. The text calls it a diagnostic ministry.
It does.
It references that ancient wisdom from the book of James. Be quick to hear, slow to speak. We usually treat that as, a polite proverb about not interrupting people at dinner.
Just good manners, right?
But the text elevates it to a kingdom posture.
Because when we rush to speak, we are being arrogant. We are assuming we already hold the answer to a pain we haven't even taken the time to fully comprehend.
Yeah.
The text links this diagnostic listening directly to the concept of lament. Lament is the raw, unfiltered language of wounded faith. When an organization actually stops trying to fix people and just listens, they are granting people the dignity to name their own reality.
They aren't rushing them past the grief.
Right. Think about how often a well-meaning person tries to comfort someone in deep tragedy by throwing a cheerful platitude at them.
Or rushing to quote a Bible verse about how everything happens for a reason.
Exactly. That isn't comfort. That's an attempt to silence the discomfort of the person speaking. A listening church gives the community the dignity of their own story. They sit with them in the ashes.
The source shares an incredible anecdote that perfectly illustrates the mechanics of this. There was a church located right on the edge of a massive, chaotic urban transport corridor.
Oh, this is such a good case study.
Right. So thousands of commuters rushed past their doors every single day. And for years, the church leadership operated under the fixing paradigm. They wanted to pull people inside. So they put up flashy signage, they handed out glossy flyers, they tried running promotional campaigns to lure commuters off the street and into their building.
And let me guess, it didn't work.
It was a spectacular failure.
Because they were demanding that the neighborhood conform to the church's internal map rather than learning to read the neighborhood's map.
Precisely. So exhausted and out of ideas, they completely inverted their strategy. They stopped trying to pull people in. Instead, a handful of members dragged some chairs out onto the sidewalk during the morning rush hour.
Just chairs?
Just chairs. They didn't have a megaphone. They didn't hand out tracts. They just sat there. On hot days, they offered free bottles of water, but mostly they just lingered. And slowly, the dynamic shifted.
Because consistency builds trust.
Yes. Because they were there every Tuesday and every Thursday, rain or shine, they started learning the names of the street vendors. They learned which commuter was running late to a second job and which one was deeply stressed about a sick parent.
They moved from being an institution on the corner to becoming a known, integrated presence in the ecosystem.
It completely transformed the relationship. Over the course of months, people who would never have walked into a formal service started stopping at those chairs to ask for prayer or just to vent about their week.
That's amazing.
The church didn't preach a single sermon on that sidewalk, but the sidewalk became a sanctuary. They earned the right to be heard because they proved they were willing to listen first.
They honored the dignity of the neighbor, but, and this is a critical transition, in the text, logic listening has a heavy cost.
Because if you actually sit on that sidewalk long enough and you truly listen, you are eventually going to hear something that requires an immediate physical response.
Exactly. You are going to hear the sound of actual starvation. You are going to hear about the eviction notice that gets served tomorrow. You're going to uncover acute physical or financial crises.
Right.
And at that exact moment, the posture of listening must instantly pivot to the mechanics of mercy.
Because sympathy without structure eventually evaporates. You cannot offer a theological treatise on suffering to a person who is freezing to death. You have to give them a coat.
Exactly.
Which drives us directly into segment 4, mercy ministries and structured compassion. The core information here is that physical needs, hunger, shelter, medical emergencies, they cannot wait for a long-term strategic plan. Mercy makes the compassion of God visible in real time.
Yes.
However, the text issues a massive warning here. Unstructured compassion is incredibly dangerous. It can create toxic dependency for the recipient, and it guarantees massive burnout for the volunteers providing it. I liken it to emergency room triage.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
You need a system, not just sympathy.
It is the difference between a panic reaction and a structured triage system. Think about an emergency room in a major hospital. When a multi-car pileup happens and 5 ambulances pull up to the doors, you do not want a hospital filled with doctors who just have really high levels of emotional empathy running around chaotic, throwing bandages at whoever looks the most distressed.
That would be a literal nightmare.
You need a highly rigid, coldly efficient system of triage to deliver the warmth of medical care effectively. You need intake, assessment, prioritization, and targeted treatment.
Sympathy is beautiful, but sympathy without a system is chaos.
The text argues that biblical mercy is actually incredibly structured. To prove this, the author provides an absolutely brilliant mechanical breakdown of the parable of the Good Samaritan.
I have to admit, I always read that parable as just a simple moral fable, Don't be a jerk like the priest, be nice to strangers like the Samaritan. But the text deconstructs it into a masterclass on systemic intervention. Let's walk through it.
It is a 6-step progression of structured compassion. Let's look at the exact mechanics of what the Samaritan does. Step 1 is attention. He actually allows his eyes to see the broken man in the ditch.
Right, because the religious leaders saw him but cognitively bypassed him to protect their own purity and their schedules.
Exactly. Step 2 is proximity. The Samaritan physically crosses the road. He doesn't just feel bad from a safe distance, he enters the danger zone.
Which, in the ancient world on that specific road, meant risking an ambush himself.
Precisely. Step 3 is immediate assistance. He uses his own resources, the oil and the wine, to bind the wounds and stop the acute bleeding. Yeah. This is the emergency room stabilization.
The triage phase.
Right. But he doesn't stop there. Step 4 is crucial. Transfer to a place of care. He puts the man on his own animal, walks alongside him, and takes him to an inn.
Okay, wait. Why is the transfer so important? Why didn't he just take the guy to his own house?
That is the key. Because taking him to his own house would have been unstructured compassion. It would have completely destroyed the Samaritan's own life, his business, his family dynamics. By transferring the man to the innkeeper, he is delegating the long-term care to someone equipped to handle it.
Oh, wow.
It is an act of establishing boundaries, which prevents the Messiah complex and prevents volunteer burnout.
That makes so much sense. It's sustainable.
Which leads to step 5, financial support. He pays the innkeeper 2 denarii, he funds the recovery. And finally, step 6, ongoing responsibility. He promises to return on his way back to cover any further costs. He establishes an endpoint and a follow-up mechanism.
That is an astonishingly sophisticated framework. It moves a person from immediate bleeding crisis all the way to sustainable, funded care while protecting the limits of the caregiver. It perfectly highlights the question the text poses to modern organizations.
Yes, this raises an important question. Are we actually helping people, or are we just relieving our own psychological discomfort when we see poverty?
That question cuts straight to the bone. The author warns vehemently against rescue without relationship.
Yeah. If an organization just backs up a truck, hands out 500 boxes of frozen chicken, and drives away without ever learning a single person's name, they aren't necessarily doing mercy.
What are they doing then?
They might just be treating human beings as a project to assuage their own guilt. They get to take a photo of the long line of poor people, post it on their website, and feel like saviors while completely stripping the recipients of their dignity and their agency.
So how does an organization avoid becoming that? How do you actually build an ER triage system for wise mercy?
The text outlines 4 non-negotiable requirements for wise mercy. Number 1, you must know exactly who you serve. You need a defined demographic or geographic population. If you try to serve everyone, you succumb to mission drift, and you end up serving no one well.
Okay, what's number 2?
Number 2, you must know exactly what problem you are addressing. Are you treating a temporary crisis, like a family whose house burned down? Or are you treating chronic, generational food insecurity? Those require entirely different interventions.
Because throwing a grocery gift card at a systemic generational poverty issue is like putting a Band-Aid on a tumor.
Exactly. Number 3, you must know how to assess need fairly and respectfully. This means having a system that doesn't shame the person asking for help, but also protects the organization from fraud.
Right.
And finally, number 4, you must know when to connect people to long-term support. Mercy is the emergency room. It is not the physical therapy clinic. It is a doorway and not a destination.
A doorway, not a destination. That is the perfect pivot point. Because once the bleeding has stopped, once the eviction is prevented, the acute crisis is over. But if the underlying behaviors, addictions, or lack of support systems don't change, that person is going to end up right back in the emergency room in 6 months.
Yep.
So how do you form a person for the long haul?
You have to move them from the triage center into a pathway of formation.
Which brings us to segment 5. Discipleship pathways and matching need to method. The core information here frames discipleship not as a series of random classes, but as shepherding structures.
Shepherding structures. Right.
A healthy organization builds a defined pathway designed to move a human being from their very first skeptical contact with the community all the way to rooted, mature leadership. The text outlines a clear progression: welcoming, moving to basic teaching, to mentoring, to small groups, deeper Bible engagement, corporate prayer, covenant membership, and ultimately leadership.
It's a journey.
But the genius here is the insistence that you absolutely must match the method of delivery to the specific need of the person.
This is where you have to know what tool to pull out of the organizational toolbox.
Right. And the author offers a really sharp, almost painful critique of modern ministry's obsession with events. Now, let's be fair. We all love a good event.
Of course we do.
They are high energy, they generate incredible momentum, they make the leadership feel powerful, and they look fantastic in promotional materials. But the text draws a hard line. Events create attention, but relationships create transformation.
Think about the toolbox analogy. An event is a hammer. If you are trying to drive a thick nail into a piece of wood, a hammer is the perfect tool. It provides a loud, forceful impact. If your goal is initial exposure, getting a neighborhood to know your building exists, a massive fall festival is a great hammer.
Right? Gets attention.
But what happens when you look closely at the map of human trauma? Deep distrust, histories of abuse, hidden marital wounds, quiet addictions. Those are not nails. Those are fragile, complex screws.
And if you take a hammer to a screw...
You're going to strip the threads and shatter the wood.
Exactly.
You cannot heal a history of profound relational abandonment by inviting someone to a massive, loud, one-time seminar. Trauma requires the slow, steady turning of a screwdriver. It requires the continuity of a long-term, low-intensity relationship.
The text gives us a brilliant hypothetical scenario to illustrate why an organization must have multiple contextual pathways rather than just forcing everyone through a one-size-fits-all funnel.
Let's hear it.
Imagine 2 newcomers walking through the doors of a community center or a church on the exact same Sunday. Person A is a skeptical, highly educated university student. Their mind is buzzing with intellectual questions, historical doubts, and philosophical objections.
Okay.
Person B is an exhausted single mother. She is working 2 jobs, her cortisol levels are through the roof, and she is carrying the crushing weight of financial stress and emotional fatigue.
So 2 entirely different diagnostic maps sitting in the exact same room.
Right. Now, if the church only has one discipleship pathway, let's say it's a highly academic 12-week deep dive into systemic theology. Person B, the single mother, is instantly alienated.
Completely.
She doesn't have the cognitive bandwidth or the executive function to debate ancient Greek translations right now. She needs practical support, a safe space for her kids, and someone to just hold her hand and pray with her. But conversely, if the church only offers emotional support groups and feelings-based check-ins, Person A, the skeptical student, bounces right out the door because their rigorous intellectual questions are being ignored or patronized.
This is what the author terms contextual formation. You have to shepherd people based on where they actually are in reality, not where your curriculum wishes they were. A pathway must have multiple on-ramps. You have to respect the actual lived constraints of the people you are serving, their transportation limits, their literacy levels, their work shifts, and their emotional bandwidth.
And the ultimate goal of all this tailored shepherding, all this complex contextual formation, isn't just to produce a massive crowd of well-fed, deeply comforted, passive attendees who sit in the pews and consume services forever.
No, definitely not.
The goal of the pathway is to build people up so completely that they can turn around and become the ones holding the screwdriver.
The end goal of discipleship is multiplication.
Which ushers us into segment 6, leadership development, raising shepherds, not spectators. The argument here is that a healthy organization cannot and must not depend on the heroic efforts of one charismatic voice.
Right.
It must multiply stewards. Leadership development is not some secondary HR function you do when you have spare time. It is the core mission strategy.
It is the difference between building a fragile empire around a cult of personality and building a multi-generational legacy through a resilient community.
Okay, let me pause and play devil's advocate here.
I'll go for it.
Because the transition from doing the work to delegating the work is the graveyard of so many founders. Handing over the keys to the car is terrifying. If you are a pastor or a director and you have built a specific program, you know exactly how it runs. You know every detail. Isn't it incredibly risky to hand that over to someone who is still learning?
It feels risky, sure.
What if they mess up a counseling session? What if they drop the ball on a major event? Honestly, doesn't it protect the community if the expert just retains centralized control?
It absolutely protects the community from short-term mistakes. It feels incredibly safe. But maintaining centralized control is institutional suicide in the long term.
How so?
Because what happens if the expert gets sick? What happens if they burn out or move away or have a moral failure? The entire institution collapses overnight because there is no load-bearing infrastructure beneath them.
Ah, I see.
The author points us straight to the Apostle Paul's model in his second letter to Timothy. Paul is sitting in a Roman prison knowing he is going to be executed. He isn't trying to build a centralized empire. He's trying to ensure survival. He tells Timothy, "What you have heard from me, entrust to faithful men who will be able to teach others also."
That is 4 distinct generations of multiplication in one sentence. Paul to Timothy, Timothy to faithful people to others.
Exactly. And look closely at the metric Paul uses for a promotion. He does not tell Timothy to look for the most charismatic public speakers. He doesn't say, find the guys with the highest raw talent or the best business acumen. He explicitly says to find faithful people. The text uses this to warn against what it calls the danger of potential.
The danger of potential. Unpack that, because modern corporate culture worships potential.
We absolutely do. We are blinded by raw talent. We see someone who is a naturally gifted orator, someone who commands a room and has massive visionary ideas, and we immediately rush to put them on the stage or give them a title.
Yeah.
But the author warns that potential without tested character is a ticking time bomb. An organization must look for tested character, for a proven track record of hidden faithfulness before handing out authority.
So what does hidden faithfulness actually look like?
It looks like the person who shows up early to set up the chairs when no one is watching. It looks like the person who quietly visits the sick widow in the hospital without posting about it on social media.
Right. No audience.
Exactly. It looks like the person who can mediate a vicious conflict in a small group without needing to be the hero. Those are the people who have the structural integrity to carry the weight of leadership.
It requires a complete paradigm shift in how we view the role itself. The text insists that leaders in this kingdom framework must view themselves as stewards, not executives.
The linguistic distinction there is vital. An executive manages assets. An executive optimizes systems for maximum growth and efficiency.
Like a CEO.
Right. But a steward is someone tasked with caring for a precious reality that belongs to someone else. In this context, they are caring for God's people. A steward must operate as a shepherd.
And the text defines shepherding as the agonizing work of holding truth and tenderness together in equal measure.
Yes, that is the tightrope walk of leadership. A shepherd must know how to teach rigid, uncompromising sound doctrine, but do so without becoming a harsh, legalistic tyrant. At the same time, they must know how to offer bottomless, deep compassion without ever compromising the truth of the map.
It's a delicate balance.
Very. If you skew too far into truth without tenderness, you build an abusive, rigid culture. If you skew too far into tenderness without truth, you build a vague, therapeutic culture that lacks the spine to actually transform anyone. A true steward holds both.
So let's pull all the way back and look at the progression. We have discarded our generic programs. We have mapped the complex realities of our specific area. We have practiced the radical, non-anxious presence of listening.
Okay, check, check.
We have triaged the acute pain by offering structured, wise mercy that protects dignity. We have built contextual, multi-lane discipleship pathways, and we are successfully multiplying faithful shepherding leaders to carry the load. By all metrics, we are doing everything right.
We're a thriving ecosystem.
But what happens when we look at the map and we realize that the depth of the crisis is still fundamentally too big for us?
Ah, yes.
What if the neighborhood needs an addiction recovery clinic and we are just a church of 200 people with a tight budget? What do we do when our ambition to heal the map collides with the reality of our own limitations?
That is the exact moment where the ego of the institution has to die and the humility of the broader kingdom has to take over.
Which brings us to our final core concept: partnership and piloting, or the humility of shared labor. The information here is a massive, sobering reality check.
Truly.
The text argues fiercely that a church or ministry should never try to duplicate the excellent work that local schools, medical clinics, or NGOs are already doing. Collaboration is framed as the ultimate form of stewardship. Furthermore, before an organization ever launches anything new, the text advises them to pilot the idea to run a small, cheap, quiet test before scaling it up. Let's tackle the partnership piece first.
The author's critique of duplication is incredibly sharp.
It really is. I love the analogy we can draw here regarding a turf war. Imagine walking down the main street of your neighborhood and seeing a fantastic, beloved local bakery. They've been there for 30 years, they employ locals, they bake incredible bread, they feed the community.
Sounds great.
Now imagine a church leadership team deciding that because they want to bless the city, they are going to spend $500,000 to open their own exact same bakery right next door just so they can stamp their own logo on the bread wrappers.
That isn't about feeding people. That is about brand management. That is institutional narcissism masquerading as compassion.
Yeah, exactly. It's a complete waste of resources.
But if we connect this to the bigger picture, the deeper theology of the text, it reveals a profound beauty regarding partnership. The premise is that God's providence is infinitely bigger than any one local congregation. The Lord is already actively at work in your community through secular teachers, civic leaders, emergency room nurses, and city social workers.
Yeah.
When a church leadership team actually recognizes that, it frees them from the crushing arrogance of needing to be the savior of the neighborhood.
They don't have to be the hero of every story. But that raises a practical question. If the school is handling education and the clinic is handling medicine, what unique value does the church bring to the partnership if they aren't the ones running the show?
They bring a totally unique, transcendent contribution. They bring intercessory prayer. They bring a theological framework that can offer a spiritual interpretation of suffering that secular institutions cannot provide.
Right, they bring meaning?
And they bring a mobilized army of volunteers. They can partner with the local understaffed public school not by trying to rewrite the curriculum, but by providing 50 reliable adults to read to kids on Tuesday afternoons. They don't need to own the project, brand the project, or control the project in order to profoundly bless the community.
It is collaboration without the demand for control. Now, let's look at the concept of piloting. I find this fascinating because it borrows directly from Silicon Valley startup culture. In the tech world, before you build a massive piece of software, you build an MVP, a minimum viable product.
Right. Test the waters.
You build a cheap, stripped-down version of your idea and put it in the hands of users to test your assumptions before you burn through $10 million of venture capital building a feature nobody actually wants. The text applies this exact same logic to community intervention.
It creates a brilliant dichotomy between two concepts: vision versus inflation.
Break down the mechanics of inflation for me.
So vision is the necessary God-given ability to see what a community could look like healed. That's good. Inflation happens when an organization takes a small, good idea and blows it up into a massive, expensive, unwieldy institution before they have ever tested it against the physical reality of the map.
Oh, wow.
Inflation is almost always driven by ego, impatience, and the desire for immediate, measurable impact. Piloting, on the other hand, is driven by epistemological humility. It is the admission that we might be wrong about what these people need.
The source material gives a phenomenal example of this in action. There was an urban outreach team that wanted to serve the commuters flooding through their local train station. Their initial inflated vision was grand. They wanted to launch a massive monthly Saturday program. They were going to rent staging, hire a band, bring in expensive catering, print thousands of flyers, the works. It was going to cost a fortune and require a massive logistical lift.
There's an inflated assumption of what the map required.
But thankfully, someone on the team had the wisdom to hit the brakes. They decided to pilot the concept first. Instead of renting the stage, they spent $50. They bought a folding table, some coffee, and some granola bars. They sent 2 volunteers down to the station on a Tuesday morning with strict instructions just to hand out coffee and ask the commuters questions.
And how did reality respond to their assumptions?
It completely shattered them. The pilot revealed that every single assumption driving their massive Saturday event was wrong.
Wow.
They learned that commuters absolutely did not want to come back to the train station on a Saturday for a long, drawn-out event. They wanted to be home with their kids. They learned that the morning rush was too chaotic. People were terrified of missing their train and wouldn't stop to talk.
Makes sense.
They discovered that the actual window for relationship building was the slower, exhausted evening commute when people were decompressing from the workday.
Imagine if they hadn't run the pilot. They would have spent their entire annual budget on that massive Saturday event. No one would have shown up. The volunteers would have been crushed by the failure, and worst of all, the leadership would have likely blamed the commuters, labeling them as hard-hearted or unreachable.
When, in reality, the church was just tone-deaf, the pilot saved them from the arrogance of their own assumptions.
A pilot is fundamentally an act of moral attention. It looks at the community and says, "You matter too much to us for us to just guess at your pain. We're going to test our ideas, listen to your feedback, and adjust our actions accordingly."
And this is where I want to turn directly to you, the listener. Take the theology and the sociology out of it for a second and just look at the mechanics of your own life, your own work, your own leadership circles. Where are you currently suffering from inflation?
It's a great question.
Where are you building massive, expensive plans, whether that's a new product launch, a new neighborhood initiative, or even how you are trying to fix a dynamic in your own family based on entirely untested assumptions? Where do you need to pause, swallow your pride, put away the grand blueprint, and humbly pilot a small, quiet version of your idea so you can actually learn what the reality of the map demands? It is a total game changer.
It requires the profound courage to be small and to look foolish for a season in order to be structurally faithful in the long run.
Well, we've covered an immense, challenging expanse of ground today. We have journeyed all the way from diagnosing the absolute danger of generic, broad-spectrum, copy-paste ministry. We explored the vital necessity of discarding our assumptions and learning to read the specific, messy reality of the map.
We wrestled with the radical, deeply uncomfortable power of just being present and listening.
Allowing the community the dignity of lament. We broke down the triage mechanics of offering structured, wise mercy that protects both the bleeding individual and the boundaries of the caregiver. We mapped out the necessity of multi-lane contextual discipleship pathways, the absolute mandate to multiply faithful, character-tested leaders, and finally, the profound humility required to partner with others and pilot our ideas before our egos inflate them.
It is an incredibly demanding but ultimately beautiful, comprehensive vision for incarnational living.
It truly is. It removes all of our shortcuts. And as we wrap up this deep dive into the source material, I want to leave you, the listener, with a final provocative thought. It's an idea that isn't explicitly spelled out in the text, but it is the logical, unavoidable conclusion of everything we've just discussed.
Okay, let's hear it.
Think back to that opening premise about the incarnation. If Jesus Christ, the Savior of the world, possessing all knowledge and all power, chose to tailor his entire approach, modulating his tone, shifting his metaphors, and designing his miracles to fit the specific, complex, traumatized individual standing right in front of him, what does that mean for how we communicate in our own daily lives?
Wow.
In our meetings, in our neighborhood associations, at our dinner tables? Are we truly doing the hard work of speaking to the specific person in front of us, reading their unique map? Or are we just lazily broadcasting our own generic, prepackaged scripts to an empty room?
That is the ultimate diagnostic question. It is the dividing line that separates institutional noise from actual incarnational love.
Because at the end of the day, when you are dealing with the fragile, beautiful complexity of human hearts, you cannot just rely on an x-ray machine. You have to step out of the clinic, walk into the muddy waters, throw away the generic medicine, and actually take the time to know the patient. Thank you so much for going on this deep dive with us today. We encourage you to step out into the world and look at your own map, your neighborhood, your workplace, your family, with fresh, attentive, and incredibly specific eyes. Until next time.